All right, so welcome to today's class. We started with our JavaScript last class. You can mute the mic. That Yeah. So we started with JavaScript last time, and we're able to talk about what is JavaScript and how to include JavaScript on the page by using the external or the internal method. And apart from that, we started with this our basic construct, which means these are the basic stuff you need to know about JavaScript before you start using it on the page. And we started with this our data type, where we talked about the number type, the string, the boolean, the null, and undefined. So by now you know the different types of or the basic type of value that we have in JavaScript, and you know how to represent number, you know how to represent string, you know what is boolean, and this null and undefined that we're going to be using a lot later on there like that. So today we are going to be starting from variables here. So what is variables? We're going to be talking about what is variables, how to define a variable, how are we going to initialize a variable, and how do you assign a variable. And from there we'll move to operators, and from the operators we'll move into this branching, which is this conditional structure, which is a way of you making sure that your code follow a specific structure. That is, you want this thing to only happen when something occur, or this thing will not run until a particular stuff happened on the page like that. And we're going to see how to use them there like that. So I'm going to go back to our code where we stop, and as you can see here, everything that we've talked about is still here, and we're going to be going with the other one here down here, which is these variables. So the first thing we need to know is variables, and I've already talked about this thing under CSS before, but I'm still going to go over it again. So when you're talking about variables, a variable is a name that you assign to a value. So a variable is a name that you assign to a value. So for example, you say 2, or you say 3, or you say 45, or you have 30, you have maybe minus 20, or whatever value that you are talking about. What does that value represent? So you don't really know, because here if you just say 2, are you talking about age? Are you talking about score, and so forth like that? So you can use a name to represent the value, so that in your code later on it will be easier for you to understand what this value is all about, because 2 can translate to anything. It can be age, it can be score, and it can be any other thing that you are doing on the page like that. But what is this 2 representing? We can now use a name, or we can attach a name to this value, and anytime we need this value, we just call the name that is attached to that particular value, and that's what we call variables. So variables, you assign a name to a value. So you can think of it as a name that you are using to represent a value. So variables, we use it, a name that we use to represent value. But what are the values? We've talked about some of the basic one that we have here like that. But you can now assign a name to them, and that name is what you can use to reference the value later on. And what do I mean by reference? You can use it to get back whatever value that you put inside that variable later on. And how do you define a variable? Which means, how do you create a variable? So in JavaScript, we have two ways. The basic or for the modern JavaScript, we have two basic way of creating a variable. In the olden days, or in all this olden JavaScript, you can use what this AI is generating right now, but I'm not going to use it because this is old. So what I'm going to be doing here is to use let. So when you want to define a variable in JavaScript, what you are saying is that JavaScript, I have a name that I want to use to represent my value later on. What you are just doing is that you are talking to JavaScript that you are creating a name that you are going to be using later on, and you are going to be putting value inside it. That's what we call variable definition there. So you are defining a variable, and to define it, you start with this let, then followed by whatever the name you want to use for your variable. So here I just declare a variable. The variable is known as variable name. So later on, I can put value inside this variable anytime that I want. For example, here I can just say let age. So this is one variable here. Again, let student name like this. This is another variable, and so forth like that. So you pick a meaningful name if you want. You can use X, it will work. You can use Y, it will work, as long as it's a valid variable name. All of them like this, they are valid variables. And I'm going to be talking more about the naming convention that you are going to be using. But for now, you see the way I'm naming the stuff. Every variable starts with small letter, but any other word that is part of them is starting with capital letter. So student is one word, name is one word. But when you are joining them together as variable, there. All right, as I was saying, so if you look at it, I have student, this is one name, and I have name, that's another thing entirely, another word entirely. But I'm joining them together as a variable. So in programming, we have different ways of naming our variable, which I'm going to be talking about later on, because that's not the major thing that we have here. So in JavaScript or in any programming language in generally that, so we have something known as a camel case naming pattern. So this is one way of naming a variable. And as you can see, when you're talking about camel case, the first letter is always small. Then every other word that you are joining together to the first one or to the second one, they will always start with capital letter like this. And that's the pattern you see that I'm following here. If it's just one word, it will just be, everything will be small letter directly. But once you are joining multiple words together, the next word that is not the first one, the starting point of each one of them will always be in capital letter. That's what we call camel case naming convention. But there's another convention too, like that. So we have the snake case like this. So this is another pattern. So instead of you putting the next word as capital letter for the first letter there, you separate them with small letter, you separate them with underscore, but everything will always be in small letter. Another pattern we have is known as this Pascal case. And as you can see, from the first one and the second one, you should know what is going to happen with this one too. So which means every starting word will always be in capital letter. So whether it's the first one, or is the second one, or is the third one, and so forth like that, then every starting of each word will always be in capital letter. And these are the three major naming conventions that you are going to be using there in any programming language you'll be using like that. But for here, I'm always going to go with this method when I have multiple words that I'm joining together. So I'm only going to go with this first method here like that. So, but in other language, you are going to see, you can see any one of them, or you can see all of them. Here too, we can use them, or you are going to see me using them too later on. But majorly for now, for my variable, this is a method that we always use. And what is this method? The starting point will always be small letter. But if there is any other word that you are joining together there, then that one is going to start with a capital letter. For example, now I can just say student, then age. So student, this is one word, age is another word, but they are forming a variable. This is just a single variable. So in order for us to differentiate different words there like that, we normally name it in this way. Or if you don't want to use that method, which is what I mentioned before, you can put everything like this. This is another valid variable naming like that. Or you do it like this. This one too is valid, but I will not be using this one because you get the time that this one is going to come in JavaScript like that. So I will not be using this method. Again too, I will not be using this one for now. What I will be using is just this method here to name my variable when I have multiple words coming together to form a single variable. And what is variable? Variable is a name that you want to assign to a value. And when you are defining a variable, what you are doing there is that you are talking to JavaScript that JavaScript, I want to have a name that I want to assign to a value. So this is the name that I'm going to be using later on. As you can see, there is no value right now. So when you are defining a value, at that point, you are just talking to JavaScript that this variable, you are going to be using it later on. But right now, I don't really have the value for it. But value is going to come in later on, because you can't just, when you're dealing with a strict JavaScript, you can't just come here and start using anything that is not defined. For example, here, if I just do console log, and if I do this Abu Bakar now, like this. So what this thing will think is that you've defined this is a variable to program here. And that's the reason why you see that any text, you have to put it in the quote if you want it to be normal text. If you want it to be normal text, it have to be in a quote. But once it's not in a quote, it's going to think that this thing here is a variable, and it will look for where you define it. And if you cannot find where you define it, what you get is error. So if I save it down, you see that it's going to give us error that we have error on line 50 because we are trying to code something that this thing doesn't know about at all, like that. And why am I not seeing my error? Let me reload the page, and as you can see right now, it's telling us that Abubakar is not defined because we did not define that variable. And that's what we are trying to do here. We are defining our variable. So we are talking to JavaScript that these are the variables that we can use later on to represent value. So if I want this Abubakar 2 to be available now, what I just need to do is to define it first before using it. So here we can now do Abubakar like this. So now we've defined a variable. So anywhere we call Abubakar, it's going to give us whatever value that we have inside it. Even though right now we don't have any value, but it will still work. Even if you don't have value, what you are going to see is that can you see it's going to give us undefined. So what that thing is telling you is that variable exists, but there is no value inside it. The error is the message is different now. There like that. So before, what we are getting is undefined because we did not define the variable. But now that we've defined the variable on line 49, then we can use it after line 49, not before line 49. You cannot use it before line 49. You have to use it after the line you've declared that variable. So what I'm doing here is known as variable declaration here. So I'm declaring a variable. I'm talking to JavaScript that any one of these variables, I can use them later on in my program to represent a value. And anytime I need it, I will just call it, and it's going to give me the value that is inside that variable. And as you can see right now, from line 51, we do the console log, but on the page is giving us undefined. And that's what is always going to happen anytime you create a variable and you don't have value inside it. What you're going to get is undefined. So what that thing is telling us is that there is no value at all inside that our variable. So it's telling us that there is no value at all inside our variable. So how do we now put a value inside our variable? That's where this assign of a value comes in here. So what you are doing here, you are just creating the variable. There is no value there at all, but you can assign a value to a variable that has already been created. So whatever variable that has already been created, you can give it a value. And how do you assign a value like that? So to assign a value, you mention the variable that you've already created before, whatever name you are using. Then you put it as this is the operator here, which I'm going to talk more here when we get under the operator. As you can see, it's part of the operator like that. So this symbol you are seeing here is known as assignment operator. And the job of this assignment operator is to take whatever you have on the right and assign it to what you have on the left. So this is how it works. This is the pattern. So just like the way you are creating a variable, that you have the variable name like this, the same way you can put a value inside that your variable. So to put a value, the variable you want to put the value inside will be on the left, followed by this operator here, which is to you it's equal to, but here it's not equal to because we have another operator for that. We call it assignment here. And after this symbol, we have the value that you want to put inside your variable. So what will happen here is that JavaScript will take the value you have here and it will put it inside the variable that you have at this side. So this is the job of this operator there like that. So the job of that operator is to take whatever you have on the left or on the right. Sorry, the job of this operator is to take whatever you have on the right, then put it inside what you have on the left side there like that. So which means if you want to put a value inside Abubakar here like that, so what we need to do is to type our variable name, which is something that we've created before. Then in front of it, we are just going to put whatever value. Right now, as you can see, I'm using string. So here, I'm just putting Mohammed Abubakar here. So anytime we call this Abubakar, this is what we are going to get because that's what that variable is representing there like that. So variable, this is our variable, and this variable will now be representing this value. So anytime you call this variable, it's going to give us whatever value that we have inside that variable there like that. So the same thing I did on line 51, I can duplicate it, then move it down again to line 60. And once I save this code, you see the first time is giving us undefined, then the second time is now giving us this Muhammad Abubakar here, because that is the value that we put inside the variable. And you can change it there like that. So you can change the value to anything you want later on, because the variable can take different value. Your variable can take different value. Your variable can take different value. So before we put Muhammad there. So right now, I don't want it to be that value again. I want it to be 67. So what we are doing here on this line here, we define our variable. Then after defining our variable, on all this other line here, we are now assigning a value to the variable. So which means here, whatever value that used to be inside Abubakar before, we are changing it to this value. And again, too, on line 61, whatever value that is used to be there before, we replace it with 67. Not that it's going to hold the two of them. So once you assign a value to a variable, it will remove the old value and it will replace it with the new value. So which means if I console log this in again like that, it will not give us the old value as from this line again. So as from line 61 downward, it will always be 67. But on line 59 to 60, it will always be this. While on this line, it will always be undefined until it gets to here, because there is no value here at all. So when there is no value, it is undefined. But when there is value, you get a value. And when you replace the value with another one, then the old one will be removed and it will replace with the new one. So if I console log out this one multiple times, you see that what we are going to be having there is going to be 67 and not Muhammad Abubakar again. So once you assign a value to a variable, that old value will be removed and it will replace it with the new value there like that. So variable, it's quite easy. It makes it easy for us to assign a name to a particular value that you are working with there. So the same thing here too, we can assign value to any of these variables that we've created at the top here like that. So if I want to assign a value, what do I do? So you get your variable that you want to assign, which is this age. For example, we already have the age at the top, and then I want the value to be 89. So what we are saying here is this text, we are using it to represent 89. Anytime we call age, it will give us whatever that we put inside it, and we can replace the value with any other value later on in case you need to change it. So if I console log out this age like that, you see that it's going to return back. Anytime you call a variable or anytime you're using a variable, it will give you the value that you put inside it before that line. Whatever value you put it inside it before that line, it's going to give it to you. And as you can see, it means this age, the value inside it is 89 and so forth like that, depending on the variable that you are working with there like that. So you can declare a variable for JavaScript to know that you are going to be using it later on to represent whatever value that you want to use that variable to represent there like that. But you must always declare variable first before you can use it. If you don't declare it and you started using it, JavaScript will look for it where you define it, and if you cannot find where you define the stuff, then it's going to give you error that it doesn't know what you are doing, or that variable is not defined there like that. But before we move on, we have something known as this initialization here. So it's just like you are declaring your variable like that. So initialization is just the process of you defining a variable and at the same time you are giving it value. The time you are defining it, that's the same time you are giving it its value. That's what we call variable initialization. So when you define or you declare a variable, you are just talking to JavaScript about that variable alone at that point. No value. You don't really know the value, but you know that the value is going to come in later on another line. But once you already know the value, you don't need to do it on two lines. You can do it on one line. And what does that mean? Here we can use let, then followed by our variable name, then followed by the value directly like this. So this one is useful anytime you already know the value. So if you already know the value, you can put all of them together on one line like this. And this is what we call variable initialization here. So the one we have at the top here is what we call declaration. So when there is no value there, when you are creating it, that's declaration. But at the point of creating it and you put the value directly there, this is what we call initialization. So this is just a different, just English that we are using here, so that later on when someone is talking about variable initialization there, you already know what that person is talking about. And when they are talking about defining a variable, you already know what they are talking about. So when someone tell you to declare a variable, what you need here is the name of the variable, not the value at that point. But when someone tell you to initialize a variable, you need to ask for the name of the variable and at the same time the value, because when you're initializing, you must have the value at that point and the name of the variable that you want to create. For example, here now you can just say age is going to be 79 like this. So I'm initializing age here, but here I'm declaring age. So this is declaring of age, while this one is initialization of age variable. So you are just declaring the variable age here, while here you are initializing the variable age. So when you are initializing the variable, you are creating it, and at the same time you are giving it the value that is going to hold on that line straightforward. But that doesn't mean you cannot change it. You can still change it later on, because your variable, anytime you use let, you can replace the value with another one. So if I console log out this one now, you say that it's going to give us the value straightforward, because at the point of creation there, we've already give it value. So we don't need to go to another line to do the stuff. If you want to do it, you can actually do it like this by doing age. You declare it first, then after you declare it, another line, then you now give it the value. So both of them are doing the same thing, but this one is doing it on 2 lines, while this one is doing it on 1 line. And if you notice, when you are creating a variable, that let is there, but when you are assigning a variable, as you can see, there is nothing like let. This is assignment, and that is the reason why I show you down here. When you are assigning a variable, you don't put let there again. If you put let, you are trying to create it and you are going to get error, because you cannot create one variable twice. So age that I've created here, that's why you see that I've commented them out here. So you cannot create one variable twice. So I cannot come here and say let. That's why you see that this one too, I call it age 1. I did not call it age. So if I remove this one now, like, can you see, it will give us error, because you cannot create the variable twice. You can only create it once, but that doesn't mean you cannot change the value. So when you create the variable, then later on what you'll be doing is to change the value, but you cannot create it again. We've already created the variable on line 57. We're now creating it again on line 60. You are going to get error when you're using modern JavaScript that we're using right now. But there's another way of doing it so that you can even define it on separate line. But that's bad, and that's the reason why the modern JavaScript is there for us, because you don't want to declare variable twice. You only want to do it once. But the only thing you can be doing is to change the value that you have inside that your variable there like that. So that's the reason why you see that I named this one age 1. I'm not naming it again as age, because you cannot create one variable twice like that. So when you are creating variable, you're always going to have this let there, but when you are assigning it, there is no need for that let. At that point, it means that variable is already there. What you are just doing is to assign or to change the value that you have inside that variable. But when you have a variable that you want to create there like that, and you already know the value, then you can initialize it. So instead of you doing it like this on 2 lines, you can just do the same thing on 1 line. So anytime I already know the value, this is the method I will always use. But if I don't know the value yet, or the value is going to come later on, then this is the method I will always use. I know that that variable is going to have the value, but not now. So I will use this second method. But if I know that the time I'm creating it, I already know the value, then I'm going to use this particular method here. But you can convert this one into this, but this is just waste of typing when you already know the value. But that doesn't mean you cannot change the value of this one like that. So once I saved like that, you see that it's still going to give me 79, but if I want, before I even print it out, I want to change it to 10. So which means when we are creating a variable, the value is 79, but after we are done creating it, we replace 79 with 10. So by the time we get to this side, it will not be 79 again. What you are going to get is 10, because it's following the last value. The last value you put inside it, that's what is always going to win. So even though we started with 79, but we've replaced the value on line 58 to 10. So which means when we get to line 59, it will see the latest value, not the old one that is there. Or if I even go to another line again, maybe I put 30 like this. So what this thing will do is that when you get to line 59, it will create, when we get to line 57, it will create the variable, put 79 inside it. Then when you get to line 58, it will replace this 79 with 10. And when you get to line 59, then it will replace 10 with 30. So which means when you get here, the value you are going to be using is the latest one, not the old one. All this one will be removed, and the one you are going to be seeing inside it is the latest value that you put. The latest value is what you are always going to get back when you call the variable. Every old value, they are gone. So if you need them, you need to save them in another variable so that you can reference them later on. But if you don't need them, you just want to replace them, then this is how to replace a value that you have in your variable there like that. So this is what we call variable initialization. You are creating variable and at the same time you are giving it the value. So when you know the name of the variable but you don't know the value yet, what you can just do is to declare your variable, and later on you can now put whatever value you want to put inside it when the value is available, or when you get to the time that you need to put something inside it. But at the time you are creating it and you already have the value, just go with this method. Simple there like that, because you don't need to start doing things on a separate line there like that. So this is a variable that can change from one value to another value, and just because you start with number doesn't mean everything have to be number. As you can see, I demonstrated this thing for you here. So just because we started with Mohammed here, which is string, doesn't mean we cannot change it to another set of number, another set of data there. JavaScript is loose, so which means it doesn't care whether you start with number to that variable, and you in other language you cannot do it like that. Once you say this thing is only going to hold number is the only thing you can put inside it. You cannot put any other thing. But JavaScript here, you are free to do anything that you want anyhow. So just because your variable, we put it as string there, doesn't mean that's the only type of data you can put there. You can change it to another type of data that you want. But in your program, you don't want to be doing something like that. You always want this thing to be predictable. So when I create a variable, I already know that whatever the type of the value I'm going to put it there is always going to be number, or is always going to be string, and so forth like that. So that's how you have to do it. But JavaScript doesn't hold your hand that you have to do it like that. So if you start with number, you can put another type of data there, and you might be tempted to do something like that, but it's going to give you a lot of problem later on. So when you create a variable, always make sure that the value you are putting in follow the same set of type like that. But that doesn't mean JavaScript will blame you, or it will bring out error if you don't assign the same type of data inside it. But make sure that variable you are creating is representing a definite value that you want, but that value can change to another type of value that is in that one that you just assigned. Just like the way I have it here, age is always number, so that's why you see that everything here are number. But that doesn't stop me from representing it as a string. It will still work like that, because JavaScript doesn't care. But we are not going to be doing it in that way. So we have a variable that can change in its value. But what if you want to create a variable that its value is not going to change at all? Like anytime you create that variable, once you initialize that variable, then you cannot change the variable again. You cannot assign another value to it again. So we have another way of creating a variable that are constant. So when you want to create a variable that is constant, instead of using let, then you can use const. So with const, you are going to have your variable name. This one is always initialization. You cannot declare it. You must always initialize it, because it must have the value there like that. So this is what we call a constant value here. For now, this variable here, what is our constant variable here? So what this means is that this is your variable. Whatever value you've initialized with it, that's the only value is going to hold. You cannot change the value to another one again. So there's some time that you want to create a variable to represent a value, but that value you don't want to change it, and you don't want to make mistake in your program changing it later on. That's where this const comes in. When you use let, as you can see from here, anytime you declare a variable use let, you can replace the value that is there before with another one. But some of these variable that you want to use, you don't want to change the value. It's always going to be the same thing every time. So since it's always going to be the same thing every time, you want to enforce it that nobody must change this value when you've already initialized it to a particular value. Once you initialize it to a particular value, you don't want anybody or you yourself to assign it to another value later on. And that's where the const, which is coming from constant. So this const is just coming from constants there like that. So when you see me using const age like this, what this mean is that the variable I'm creating here, whatever value that I put here, I cannot change it again. That's what this const is. If you use let, you can replace the value later on. But once you use const, what this mean is that you cannot replace this value after this line. This is the only line where you can change the value. After this line, you cannot change the value again. And that's the reason why you have to initialize it, because you cannot use const to declare. You must always give it value. And once you give it that value, then that's the end. You cannot change the value again. You can only access the value, but you can't change the value. So if I console log out the age, you see in the console, we are going to have 78 coming out there. So once this thing get to the browser, you are going to see that 78 is going to come outside on the console, as you can see. But yeah, I can't go to next line and I said age is 30 like this. It's wrong. It will not work and it's going to cause error. So if I save it now, you see that this will give me error that I'm trying to, can you say, uncut. So assignment to a constant variable. When you say your variable is constant, it means once you initialize that variable, you cannot change its value again. It will always be 78. You cannot change it to another value. If you want to change the value, then you have to do it on this line, not after that line. Whatever the line you create, whatever the line that you initialize that variable, that's the only line that you can change the value. After that line, you can't just come here that you want to assign the value. It will not work because you said the variable is going to be constant. So if you want this thing not to change, if you don't want the value to change, you use const. But if you want the value to change, then you are going to use let. So if you want this one to work the way it is before, that the value can change, then instead of const here, what you are going to use is let. So this one will allow you to change the value. So if I save it now, you see that there won't be any problem and everything will work correctly. But once I change this let now to const, then it will not work again, because we are talking to JavaScript on the line that this our variable age, we don't want to change its value again after this line, because that's what you are talking to it, and that's the reason why it's bringing out the error here like that. So when you use const, because you are going to see me using it, it means that value I don't want to change it again. And anytime you see me using let there like that, it means that value I want to replace it with another value later on. So you can use any one of them, but the time you are going to use const is when you know that the value will not change again. And the time you are going to use let is when you know that the value will change, or if it's not even changing, you can only use let. It doesn't care. That one doesn't care. Whether you change it or you don't change it, you can use let there. But if you want to enforce it that, oh, even if I make mistake later on, bring out the error, so you can use const. And that's the reason why you should always use const. When you know that the value will not change again, always use const so that you don't make mistake in your program later on and change the value. As you can see here, if I change this thing to let now, you see that it's still going to work, but there's an error here because we don't want to change this value from 78. But now something is not happening. Your program will not work as expected again. Even though the scene is still running, but the calculation will be wrong later on if I'm using the value of age, because it has been changed from 78 to 30 somewhere, which is not supposed to be. So even though the thing is working, the program is running, but that doesn't mean it's working correctly, because the calculation will not be right. Where you're expecting 78, what you are going to be getting there after this line is now going to be 30. So the first time you are creating it, before you get to line 66, all the value will always be 78. But once you go past this 66 there like that, the value will now be 30. It will never be 78 again, which is going to make your calculation to be wrong if you are depending on 78 there like that. But once you use it as const, anywhere in your program, if you try to change the value, it will always bring out the error. It will not even get to this line again. It will stop on this line, because that's how JavaScript works. Anywhere you see the error, that's the line is going to stop. As you can see, it stopped on line 66. It's not going again to line 67 until you fix this error here. That's when it will continue to do other stuff you have in your program there like that. So anywhere you need to change the value, use let, and anywhere you don't need to change the value, use const, so that you are on the safer side. But you can actually use let whether you want to change it or you are not changing it like that. But in order for you to be on the safer side, always use const when you don't want to change the value there like that. And that's all about the variable that you need to know for now. So variable, we use it to hold value, and that your value can change over time there. And when you know that the value is going to change, you know what to use. You need to use let. And when you know the value is not going to change there like that, you need to use const like that. So we need to talk about operators in JavaScript. So we need to talk about operators in JavaScript. I've talked about this number 2 already, but there's some other operator like this arithmetic, which is the mathematical operator that you know already there like that, because there's some time you need to perform some mathematics operation there with JavaScript, because JavaScript is not just for you using it for the page alone. You can use JavaScript outside of the browser, where you can start doing backend, and when you need to do some calculation, even on the page step, you can create a calculator there like that. And as you're calculating, you need to use some of these mathematical operator there like that. And we have some of them here, as you can see. I just brought them in like that. So when you add 5 to 3, we're expecting us to get 8, and when we remove 3 from 5, we're expecting to get 2, and so forth like that. So the plus is for the addition, this one is for the subtraction. The only one that I know that it's kind of a difference there like that are these last two that are strange. Every other one, they are just simple stuff that you know already. For example, 5 plus 3 like that, we are going to get 8. 5 minus 3, you are going to get 2. Minus 5 minus 3, you get your normal mathematics value like that, because you are owing 5 and you still owed 3, so then that means you are owing 8 like that, and so forth like that. Again, we have multiplication. So to multiply, we use asterisk like that. So 5 times 5, we are going to get 25 like that. So to multiply the value, what you have is that use the asterisk like that, and to divide, we use the slash. So 5 divided by 3, we get a value, and 10 divided by 2, we get a value. 2 divided by 10, you get a value, and so forth like that. So these are the simplest one there that you know already in math. But this other two is still simple like that, just that this is what we call the exponential. You know, the way we represent it in math is not the same thing the way it is here like that. So when you're talking about exponential, it's something like this: 2 raised to power 3. But there's no way you can type this in on your keyboard. There's no way you can take 2 and you now put 3 on top of it like this. It's not possible. So you cannot do that on your keyboard. So the way we did it is 2, then you have the asterisk twice, then followed by 3. So these are just the same thing. So anytime you have you want to do something like this, this is how you are going to represent it in your code. So what you are doing here is 2 raised to power 3. When it is 1 asterisk, you are multiplying there. But when it is 2 asterisk, then you are doing power. So if it is 5 raised to power 4 like this, so to do it, it's going to be 5, then double asterisk like that, then 4 like this. So these are the same in the code. So this is how you do it in the code, but this is what you want to do like that. So take 3 to the power of 2 like that. So what we just do is 2, then asterisk 3 like this. So it's going to give us, when you do 2, 1 asterisk, this is multiplication. When it is 1 asterisk, that's multiplication. When it is 2, that's power. So which means this is 2 raised to power 3, and this one is 3 raised to power 2. They are not the same thing like that. So 2 raised to power 3 is not the same thing as 3 raised to power 2, because it's not like that in maths. So when you want to raise to power, this is how to do it in a simplest way. There's still another way of doing it, but for now, this is the simpler ways of doing power like that. And the other one we have is modulus here. So when you're talking about the modulus, this one is talking about the remainder. So this one is talking about the remainder like that of the division. So when you have a division, or when you are dividing a value, so you're always going to have a remainder for that value like that. For example, we have let's just say we divide 10 divided by 2. So we have 5. So what is the remainder of this? You know, it's going to be 0. So what if you want to get the remainder, not the answer itself or the that you want? So I don't want this 5. What I want is the remainder of this division. That's where the modulus comes in, which is the percent symbol. So when you do 10% 2, what you are doing here is the remainder of this division. So when you divide 10 by 2, what is it going to remain there? So that's what this operator is going to give you. As you can see, is remaining 0. And you know, when you divide 5 by divided by 3, you know, this is 1. So that means we need to add 2 in order for it to complete 5. So which means when I do this 5 module 3 like that, you can see it's going to give us the remainder of the division. That's just what this one is there for. Anytime you need to get remainder of the division, that's what this one is there for. And this thing is very important when you are doing some calculation that deal with mathematics later on, that you need to get. Maybe for example now, you have a range of days, which is Monday to Sunday, like that. And someone I give you, okay, what is going to be the day when you have maybe like 20 days? Assuming today is Wednesday or today is Monday. So in 20 days, which day is it going to fall on? So you can use this modulus to calculate, to get the remainder based on the range of the value that you have. But we're going to be using it later on. But the job of this is to get the remainder of the division there. So if you need the quant, just 5 divided by 3, it will give you the result. But if you need the remainder, then you are going to use this operator to get the remainder of that your division there, like that. So this one gives us the power, which is the exponential there, like that, or we can call it power. Again, this is modulus, which is just the remainder of your division, like that. So this one is what you use to divide. This is what you use to multiply. This is what you use to subtract. And this is what you use to add numbers together. But this plus, it goes more than that. It's not just adding numbers together. It can help you to join your string together too. So plus is doing two work, because you should be careful when you are using it. So when you're using plus, you should be careful when you are using it with value. So when you're using the plus with number like this, you are going to get your normal mathematics calculation. 5 plus 3, which is going to be 8. But once you have a string and you are using plus with it, it will never give you the value that you expect. As you can see, what is coming out. When there is a quote there, I told you, when there is a quote around anything, that thing is not the type you're expecting again, is non-string. Once there is a quote, it will not treat it as number again. It is going to treat it as a string, which is normal text. And here, plus is crazy. It doesn't work like that, or the way it works with number is not the same way it works with string, because it's doing multiple jobs based on where you are using it. So based on where you are using this plus, is going to perform a separate operation there, like that. When you are using it between two numbers, it's going to calculate your normal mathematics for you. But when you are using it in between a string, or as long one of the value is string, what it's going to do here is what we call concatenation. And what is concatenation? Is just a way of saying you are joining string together. That's another thing. So when you say concatenation, string concatenation, what you are doing here is that you are combining multiple texts together. So I have this text, which is going to be ABC. Then I want to combine it with another text that is coming from somewhere else. Again, I can just use the plus. And once you use plus in between string like this, as you can see, it will join all of them together. And that's what it's doing here. It's not going to do any mathematics once there is a quote there. What it will do is, it will just join all the text together, or to combine them to text and join them together. So 5 here is joined together with this 3. That's the reason why you are seeing 53 here, which is what is the same thing that is going on here. Once there is a string as part of whatever you are putting beside the plus, it will not do your mathematics again. What is going to be doing there is just to join them together. So here, as long one of them is string, so here if I use 5, then plus like this, and I have string of 3, is still going to be the same thing because it's done in a quote. And if both of them is a quote, as long one of them is in quote, it will always join them together. It will not do what you be expecting there like that, because this thing will cause problem later on. That's why I'm explaining it here, because everything you are going to be getting on the page, they are not going to come back as the value you want. They are going to come back as string, because everything you are seeing on this page, even though to you this is number, but by the time it gets to you, is not going to come back as number, it's going to come back as string. So you need to convert them to a proper type so that by the time you are dealing with your calculation, you don't get the wrong result. So to JavaScript, everything is successful here, but to you it's not, because what you want to do here is to add 5 to 5, which is supposed to give us 10, but right now it's not giving us 55, which is wrong. But to JavaScript it is right, and the reason why it's right is what I'm explaining right now. So when you're dealing with string and you use the plus with them, it's not going to give you what you're expecting. It's going to join them together like this. But for the other operator, it doesn't work like that. So other operators are working normally. For example, if I put 5 minus 3 here, as you can see, it's working for minus like that. But plus is doing multiple job, because this one is not doing multiple job like that. That's why it's working. It will convert this one to number. Then from there, it will subtract 3 from it. But when you're doing plus, and there's a quote there, the job of that one is that it will convert it to string. Everything you have there will be string, and since everything is string, it will join all the text together like that. So whatever you put here, what it will just do is to join them together as a string, and the result you are going to get back to is string, not number. So when there is a quote there, when you are using plus, it will never give you what you'll be expecting there, which is a normal mathematics calculation. So that's not how it works when you are dealing with it. So later on, you're going to see how, let me even explain it. You can convert from one type to another type. Some of these type can be converted to other type like that when you need them. For example, you can convert from number to string like that, and you can convert from string to number, because what is coming back from the page is going to be this thing. Again, you can convert from boolean like that to number, or you can convert from boolean to string, or you can convert from string to boolean, because most of the time or sometimes you need to convert the type so that you'll be able to do your calculation correctly, because if you don't convert the value, you will not get what you are expecting there like that. So you can convert from one type to another anytime you need them like that. For example, let me just show one of them. So if I want to convert to number now, maybe I have this 3. This 3 is not 3, this is string 3. But if I want to convert it to number, I can just pass it into this number function. But because I'm not really talking about function, so that's why I don't want to go into it right now. And as you can see right now, it is having quotes, but this one is going to convert it to a proper number. So which means here now, I can use it like this, then plus 3. You see that we are getting the correct value. Even though it's a quote, assuming we are getting it from the page like this, then we convert it to number, we add it to 3, and as you can see, we get the correct calculation. But if you don't convert it, you just use it directly like that, you will not get, as you can see, it will do something else. So that's the reason why you need to do conversion sometime. You convert to the type you want. The same thing too, if I want to convert to boolean, we can use this, and you pass whatever value you want to convert to boolean like that. But for now, I don't need them. Anytime we need them, I'm going to bring them like that. But for now, we don't need them there. So this is arithmetic operator. But let me quickly talk about this one like that. Let me quickly talk about this, and let me move this one up because it's not supposed to be part of this place like that. So let me move this one up to this side, or let me move it to the side I was talked about it. So since we talked about it here, so let me move it to this side, so like that. So the other operator that we have here is known as this comparison operator. So we have this comparison operator, and these are them. These are the names. So let me bring it out. So when you're talking about the comparison operator, these are the list of the operator. What's strong VS Code? Yeah, so these are the comparison operator that we have there. And as you can see, this is what we use for equality now. So I told you that this one is not equal to. In mathematics, this is equal to, but here is not equal to, is known as assignment. So when you want to check whether something is equal to another thing, this is what we use. So this one allows you to check whether a particular value is equal to another value. While this one is checking whether the value is not equal to another value, this is greater than, this is less than, this is greater than or equals to, and this is less than or equal to like that. For example, here we want to check whether a particular value is equals to another value, or in a more real world solution there like that. For example, you have a variable, maybe it's something you are getting from the API. For example, I have username, and I want to check whether that username is matching a particular text. For example, I have the admin like this. So if I want to check whether the username is admin or is something else like that, so we can use this equality to check, and based on that check we can do something in our program. For example, we can check whether the user is logged in or not. For example, here, whether the user logged in or not. So I can just have const logged in. This is another variable I'm creating. By now you know what is variable, so I'm having it as false as a value like that. So I can check whether the value that is inside this place is true or is false, or I can check whether the value that is inside this username is admin or user, and so forth like that. That's what all these comparison operator are there like that. Again, I can just say const age is going to be 5. So here too, I can check whether this my age is less than a particular age that I'm looking for or not, or is greater than the age that I'm looking for, and so forth like that. That's why you'll be using all these comparison operator like that. For example, here now we can check the value of age. As you can see, the value of age is 5 like that, and here I can check whether age is greater than 60, and as you can see, we have false. So anytime you are using any of this operator, what you always get back will always be true or false. You can never get any other thing when you're using these operators here. Anytime you're using any of these operator, the result that you are going to get will either be true or false. You can never get any other thing apart from this. So when you're dealing with this, what you always get back is either true or false. So here you are asking a question: is age greater than 60? What is the value of age? That's what you're going to. Don't forget, this is a variable, because we've declared a variable and we've already assigned it. So which means we are initializing variable here. And as you can see, that I use const because I will not be changing it again. That's why I use const. But if you want, you can still use let. It will still work whether you use let or const. But I will always use const anytime I'm not changing the value there like that. So if you look at it, we have the age. The value is 5. And here we are checking whether that the value that we put inside this age is greater than 60. And what you get back here is either true or false. When something is true or when something is yes, you get true. And when something is no, then you get false there like that. Again, if I do age is less than 60, you see now it's true, because the value of age is 5 and 5 is always less than 60. And that's the reason why we are getting true. It's not much that you use variable, you can use your value directly there like that when you are doing your comparison. But most of the time, what you always use is the variable, because you already put the value in a variable, then you call the variable to give you the value and you compare it against whatever you want to compare it against there like that, just like what we have on this line. But you can do it directly without using a variable. The operator is a major thing here, which is what is in between them like that. So we can check whether one value is the same thing as another value. For example, like this username now, as you can see, the value that is there is admin. So we can check if username is the same thing as user like this. So equality check. So this one is checking whether whatever you have on the left is equals to whatever you have on the right. And as you can see, it's giving us false, because there is no way admin will be equals to the user. But if I put it now, maybe I put the admin back there like this, as you can see, it's not giving us true. So based on this now, you know that the person that logged in is admin. For this one, you know that the person that logged in is not admin. And for this one, you know that the person that logged in is admin. Then based on that, for this one, you show the admin UI. And for this one, you don't show the admin UI. You show the user UI. And you're going to see how to do all this in later on. But all this in is what we're going to be combining together, because we need to check who logged in. Is the person logged in? If they log in, so is it the normal user or is it the admin user? So this is what you'll be using to check the value. So if you match what you are looking for, then you do what you're expected to do at that place. But if it's not matching, you do something else. And that's what we're going to be doing here later on in the next class, because I don't think we're going to do it, which is this branching here, because we want to do some stuff based on the condition. But what are the conditions? This is what we're going to be using later on to check whether the thing matches what we're expecting or not. If it match, we do something for that. If it's not matching, then we'll do something else for the stuff, and we're going to do that when we get to that part. But these are the operators we're going to be using like that. So for this greater than, it check whether the value is greater than whatever you have on the left is greater than what you have on the right. So if it's greater, you get true. If it's not, you get false. The same thing here too for the less. You check whether whatever you have on the left is less than whatever you have on the right. If it is less, you get true. If it is not less, then you get false. And as you can see, there's no way 5 will be less than 3. That's why it is false. And here, 5 is always greater than 3. That's why it is true. And again, we have this greater or equal to, which combine two things together. So when you say 5 is greater or equals to 3, what this one is doing is that it's checking whether it is greater or it is equal to 3. As long one of them is true, then both of them is true. There is no way 5 will be equals to 3. But since 5 is greater than 3, that's why it is true. So you are checking two things here. You are checking whether it is greater or it is equal. So if it is greater, then that means it is okay. Or if it is equal, then it is still okay. So this one will always be okay if it is greater or equal there. So if I say 5 is greater than 5, this one will be false, because there is no way 5 will be greater than 5. So here now we can now use 5 equals to or greater than 5. So now as you can see, it's true, because it's doing two things here. Is either greater or equal. So because we know that the 5 is not greater than 5, but we know that the 5 is equals to 5, and that's the reason why it is true here. So this one is checking whether it is greater or equal. Two things. So here it can be this or this. As long one of them is true, then both of them is true. That's this operator. The same thing too when you do 5 less or equal. So this one, it can either be less or equals to whatever value you have there. So left can either be less or equals to whatever you have on the right. As long one of them is true, then the two of them is true. But this one is strict. So when you say greater than 5, there's no way 5 will be greater than 5, and there is no way 5 will be less than 5. It's not possible. But 5 can be equal to 5, and at the same time too, if you want to check whether they are not equal to, maybe you are looking for the negative there like that, so you can use not equal to. So this is what we call not equal to, which is this one. So this one, check if they are not the same, and that's when it's going to return true. So it's this one is the opposite of this. So anywhere this one is giving you true, this one will give you false, and anywhere this one is giving you false, this one will give you true. As you can see now, if I do 5, you can see it's false. So anywhere you use equality check and the result you get there is true, just know that this one will give you the opposite of that, which is going to be false. So anywhere this one will give you true, then this one will give you false, and anywhere this one will give you false, then this one will give you true, because that's what it's doing. This one is, it will only return true when they are not equal. So when they are not equal, this one will return true. But when they are not equal, this one will return true, this one will return false. And when they are equal, this one will return true, this one will return false. So it's always they are opposite to each other. So anywhere you are getting true for equality check, then just know that this one will return false for that side, like that. So we're going to use all this in when we get to this side. We're going to use them a lot at this side, like that. So but for now, we don't need to do much on it, and I think it's already 1 hour, because I don't want this thing to go more than an hour. I don't want the video to be longer than there, because when you want to watch again, it's always good that the thing is short, so that it will be easier to watch compared to just having a long video that it will start looking or start becoming boring when the stuff is really long there. So for this operator, before I call it a day, I'm going to explain this operator in the next class, because the way it works, it's kind of a crazy like that. So its own is kind of a crazy, and I have an example and the way it's supposed to be. So I'm going to be talking about this one in the next class. Let me check the calendar. Where's the calendar? So where's the calendar? On the calendar, yeah, what's the next day on the calendar? I think the next day is 27th. There, like that. So on that day, we're going to start with this logical. Then from there, we're moving into the, because this logical too will be used here, and that's the reason why I want to explain it along with this one. So all this comparison operator and everything we talked about at the top here, we're now going to be using them there. And that's the reason why you see that the arrangement is like this, because you can't just talk about this one without you not knowing this. So let's go that we start with all this basic one, then move into the next one. So when we are done with this one too, we move into this array, then we move into object. But in the next class, we're going to talk about this, the branching and this array. I will not do spend much time on this because we need to move forward into this array like that. We should get to array, but I doubt if we are going to get to this object part like that. So if we're not able to get to the object, then I'll combine it with this function because both of them always go together with like that. So that's going to be all for today. So we talked about the variable, which is very important. That's why I took time on it, because this variable is very important. It's something that you're always going, 90% of time you are always going to use it, because you can't run away from variable, because every value you want to use is not every time you are going to be typing 30 every time. What you do is to use a name to represent it. Then anywhere you need it, you use a name to call it, because you can't just be saying 3078. What does 78 represent? What does 30 represent? But when you assign a name to it, from there, through the name, you already know what the 30 is all about. Through the name of the variable, you already know what 78 is all about, and so forth like that. As you can see down here that I have a variable username. If I just say admin, what is admin? What is first? What am I using first for? But based on the name, I know that I'm using it to represent whether the user logged in or not. Yeah, I know that I'm using age for 5, and I know that this admin is just username of the user that is going to be logging into the system, and so forth like that. So variables are very important, and at the same time too, the operators are very important. But for now, the major operator that we're going to be using is just this assignment, which allows you to put a value. As you can see here, we have a variable and we're assigning this value into it. But yeah, don't forget we call this variable initialization. So all this one, we are initializing our variable. So which means you create the variable and at the same time you put the value, because I already know the value. I don't need to go to separate line to assign the value. But if you want to change the value, you know that you can't use const. You have to use the let, because the const will not allow you to change value. Once you've initialized it, that's the end of it. You cannot change the value again to another one. But if you know that the value you want to deal with, it's something that you need to change there like that, then you have to use let. So here we have let age to be 79. So which means after this line, we can still change it to a separate value in case you need to do that. And again, the last value is what you're always going to get back anytime you are accessing that variable. Anytime you call the variable, it will always give you the value. And which value? It will give you the latest value that you put inside it. So these three values here now, the only thing we are going to get is just 30. Every other one, they are gone. That's the end of them. If you need it, you need to put in another variable so that you can reference it later on. And you're going to see how to do that, because it's not every time that when you remove the value, that's the end of that value. Sometimes you still need it. So what you do is to save it to another variable first before you change it to another one, so that you can reference it anytime you need the old value that is there. But once you put another value, all this one, they are gone. Even though right now it looks like I'm the one typing the value, but don't forget, we're going to be dealing with the content of the page. So which means the value will be coming from the whatever content you have on the page, and at that point there is no way you know that whether it is 79 or it is 30, it is new. So it's not always something that you always see them like, oh, since I am the one that put 79, I can just call that 79 later on. It might not be like that, because the user will be the one that will be carrying out this action, and you know that these are the set of action that user will carry out, but you don't know the exact one. So at that point, there is no way you can know which value is there, but you know that the value is going to be there, and based on that value you can operate. And that's the reason why we have all this operator to check the value at that point, because you don't really know whether the user that signed it is admin or is user. But based on the condition here, you can know that, oh, since you check and the thing is returning true for you, you know that at that point it is admin. Or when it is returning false, you know that at that point it's not admin that logged in there like that. So that's why all these things are there, so that you can deal with all this uncertainty that is going to be coming in, because it's not every time that you are going to be the one that will type the value yourself like this. You know the set of value, but you don't really know the actual value at that point. But you know that it will either be this or that. Then that's the reason why you now start doing all this checking to see whether it is this particular value. And when it's that value, or when it's falling in the range of what you are looking for, you know that this is what is going on at that point. But that doesn't mean it cannot change like that. So that is going to be all for today. And let me stop the